So yesterday I heard an interesting factoid or statistic that the actuary people have come up with regarding the future of automated cars. So like your Teslas and self-driving cars essentially. And in the future, when more and more cars are self-driving, given that the cars will not fall asleep and this, that, and the other, there will be far fewer car accidents, which rightly so is a good thing, right? Fewer people getting killed. But one of the hidden little dirty truths is that there's an entire industry that's going to suffer because of it. And I know, of course, you know, it's going to be mechanics and body workshops and all this other stuff. Yeah. Okay, so fewer accidents, fewer cars to repair, this, that, and the other. All right. But you got to get darker. You got to think about the industries that will suffer in a whole different way. And what industry is that? Organ donors. You see, the fact is that a lot of the organs that get donated are coming from people who were in accidents, vehicular accidents, and that had their unfortunate demise in a vehicular collision of some kind. So, with the safer driving that automated cars will give us, we will have a steady increase, unless another organ farm is found, a steady increase in the numbers of people who are dying now because they will not receive a transplant. And my father happens to be someone who received his lungs when he had a double lung transplant from a young man who, I believe he was 25 and was killed in a motorcycle accident. So, because of that guy's demise, my father was given, 7 more years of life that otherwise he would have died the year that he received his transplant. He was on death's bed already. But yeah, just one of those, you don't think about it because it's not the first thing you think about when you think about saving lives. Is while you're saving one life, you may be causing the loss of another. Which, ultimately you look at and you go, okay, well that's fate, that's genetics for whatever reason. A large percentage of the people who receive organs through transplant, it's not because of their own doing that they need the organ. You know, it's usually some kind of genetic defect that causes an organ to fail. And this gets to a whole nother topic that a lot of people think I'm pretty, I don't know, sick about, is natural selection, man. I'm definitely one of those people that think that we've gone too far in protecting the weak or weaker genetic people. When these tragedies happen, you know, and some child is born with a disease or a condition that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, that child would probably have died either at birth or shortly thereafter. But because we have modern medicine and the ability to keep people alive somewhat artificially, you know, until they figure something out, we look at that as like a miracle, right? It's this miracle cure or miracle technology because it saves a person. And now if that person grows up and, you know, has children, that genetic defect or that anomaly that otherwise would have been weeded out through natural selection is passed on, for better or for worse. Sometimes genetic defects that normally are a weakness now may be a strength later. If you're not familiar with the Black Plague, they believe that there was a genetic defect that caused people who were, I want to say, anemic. They had a blood disorder that didn't allow certain proteins to bond normally. The proteins wouldn't bond normally to their blood cells. And so when the Black Plague came along, these people who had a disease, the disease actually prevented the plague from killing them. It didn't allow the plague to destroy the cells of their body the same way that a normal person's would. So that's a good example of someone who, you know, if they had been cut as a child, they may have bled to death. But since they weren't cut, or their cuts were healed in a manner that, you know, stopped the bleeding fast enough, they survived. And then ultimately they passed on this deformed gene to their children and whatnot. And that rare deformity, whew, it's a pretty good headwind right now. That rare deformity is ultimately what saved some Europeaners. Because otherwise the Black Plague would have just decimated all of Europe. But because this mutated gene existed in the DNA of certain people, they weren't affected. And the way that they figured this out is even more interesting, because what they found is this mutation at the time, you know, saved people from the plague. And now they're finding that there are some people who can't be affected by HIV the same way because of this same mutation. And that's kind of how they backtracked and figured out that this mutation that developed sometime in the early dark ages today is saving some people from HIV. Oh man, now it's an even worse headwind. Ugh. It's not very often that the wind comes out of the north. It's usually out of the east. Anyway, so where am I going with all this? I don't know. I guess I just kind of shut down all of my own arguments, right? Sometimes it's better to let the weak perish, to not dilute the pot of the future, but at the same time, sometimes those weaknesses are actually strengths at a later date or in a different situation. I don't know, what do you guys think? Anyway, I'm to work and it's early. Catch you next time. Bye.